Hi, welcome to the State of Customer Service Messaging and Best Practices for Success webinar, hosted by eGain and Forrester. My name is Diane Tang from eGain, and I am the event coordinator for this webinar.
Good morning, everyone, or good evening, depending upon what part of the world you're in. Thank you for taking the time to come to this webinar. You heard Ian talk about the state of customer service messaging. What I would like to do over the next 30 minutes or so is to kind of continue that conversation from where Ian left off. I want to talk a little bit about what we see in the market. We also did a survey recently across US and UK. I want to talk a little bit about our findings in the survey, which I think will be interesting to you. And then what I would really like to leave you with is a recipe of sorts for a good messaging solution. So, we know this by now. We spent about 30 minutes talking about messaging, so we know messaging is hot. It's the in thing today. It is by far becoming one of the most popular ways people communicate with each other in general, and now it's becoming one of the popular ways people communicate with brands. So what I want to do is take a look at what we really mean by messaging is hot. How popular is messaging really? And I want to throw some numbers out there. So this is Facebook Messenger, but Facebook has another property called WhatsApp, and WhatsApp actually has a higher number of active monthly users at about 1.5 billion. And the second number is for text messaging, and this is an estimate of how many consumers will opt in to text to receive business SMS messages. So, and again, if you take in all the other networks, and we have only taken the most popular two, right? Just the Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp. If you consider all the other networks like the WeChats, the Lines, etc., that are popular in other parts of the world, a significant portion of the world's population use messaging actively. Just a few additional numbers. The first number is actually a worldwide number for text messages that are exchanged. And about 8 trillion text messages exchanged every year between people across the world. And according to CTIA, which is the wireless industry for the United States, just the United States number is about 1.8 trillion. If you add Facebook and WhatsApp into the mix, that number just goes to about 60 million messages per minute. What's more interesting is the growth that these channels have seen over the last decade. That number on the right side is just for text messaging. It's seen about a 77 times growth, or 7,700% growth over the last decade. So it's seen a significant amount of growth, and it's clearly continues to grow as we speak. And one of the things that people tend to not consider when they look at messaging is proactive notifications. And we actually think that's a very integral part of messaging. And I did talk about the 50 million number in the beginning. That's the number that is estimated. That's the estimated number of customers who will opt in to receive business SMS messages by 2020. The bottom number, I think, is more interesting. That's actually one of our current customers, a large pharmacy in the United States. They actually have 41 million customers who have signed up to receive reminders for prescription refills. So we think that that 50 million number is easily achievable, or will surpass the 50 million number by 2020. So that's actually a number that we see today in the market. And of the consumers that have been surveyed, 89% of them say they want to communicate with businesses using a messaging channel. So clearly messaging is popular. But what makes it this popular? Why do people want to use messaging? I think Ian touched upon quite a bit of this in his slides in the beginning. But a few things I want to just remind you guys on is it's really popular because it's easy, right? Everybody these days has a smartphone. You have a smartphone, you have messaging. It might be the basic SMS. It might, if you are an iPhone, it might be iMessages, which automatically gives you Apple Business Chat. If you're a Facebook user, you have Facebook Messenger. Or if you have friends and family in other parts of the world, you probably use a messaging app like WhatsApp because it's just really convenient. So ease is really a big thing when it comes to why people opt for messaging. The second thing, and again, Ian touched upon this, it places no demand on your time. So with a traditional channel like voice, there is a demand on your time. You call somebody or somebody calls you, you have to have a conversation at that minute. And how many times have we received calls where you said, oh, I can't talk right now, I just have to either call you back, right? Messaging places no such demands on your time. You get a message, you can reply when you're ready, and the other party will reply when you're ready. Now, these become more important both in terms of how businesses have to adopt to messaging, and they also become challenges when businesses try to adopt to messaging. And I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end when we talk about the recipe for a good messaging solution. The other part with messaging, again, Ian did talk about this in detail, was that it keeps context of your conversation over long periods of time. In most cases, even if you're contacting brands using regular channels, the context of the conversation is short-lived. So if it's a voice call, it's through the end of the voice call. If you're using emails, it's a chain of emails, but after that, the context is not available, or even if it's available, it's not easily accessible. With messaging, the context lives over long periods of time. All you have to do on your app is to scroll back up to see what you talked to the businesses about the last time you contacted them. So it keeps context over long periods of time. It's easy and places no demand on your time, which clearly makes it a very good channel for consumers to talk to businesses. Now, businesses have to adapt to all those needs from a consumer. Now, again, I'll touch upon these as we talk about a strategy for messaging, because these things will become really key in how you design a solution for messaging. Now, before we get there, I do want to talk about a survey that we did recently. We partnered with YouGov. What we really wanted to find out was, how was messaging faring in the customer service industry? How many people actually interact with businesses using messaging, what they like about it, what they don't like about it, some demographic splits, etc. So we surveyed both US and UK customers. We got about 6,000 odd responses. So obviously the first question was just on adoption. Now, the thing to keep in mind when we look at a 30% number on adoption, this is the percentage of of people who had communicated with a business using a messaging channel. Messaging is still a growing channel. Most businesses still do not offer messaging as a channel for their consumers to talk to them. So we think that 30%, given where messaging is in the market, is actually a very high number. We did find US slightly ahead of UK when it comes to using messaging, but I think that's more probably because of the channel preferences in the US itself. What do consumers love when they use messaging? And we tried to look at effectiveness, whether they found the channel effective at all. And this is actually also a very impressive number. Again, keep in mind that messaging is still in its infancy. People are still getting used to the various kind of things that you need to do to have an effective messaging channel. 86% of people that were surveyed said they found messaging either somewhat effective or very effective. And for a channel that's fairly new, that's actually an incredibly high number. So clearly people find messaging effective. And I think that goes back to some of the advantages the messaging channel brings in, like the ease of use and the demands it places on your time, etc. And when it comes to just pure satisfaction versus other channels, and this is specifically messaging versus other channels, again, here the numbers are pretty significant, right? 70 odd percentage of people are either equally satisfied on the messaging channel or more satisfied. Again, considering the fact that messaging is fairly new, that's a very, very high number. And we actually think that number will significantly grow. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about what are the challenges people are facing in messaging. So this is again, a few splits by demographics, right, by age. And these numbers, the splits themselves are not surprising. We always expect the younger generation to pick up messaging more than the older generation. So that's not particularly impressive. But what is interesting of this in this chart is the fact that the drop-offs as you move up the demographic scale in age are not that high. It's 49% between 18 and 34 to only about to 35% in the age group that's 55 plus. So we expect to, especially with new technology, especially with technology that requires you to use a smartphone, etc., we expect those drop-offs to be high. But with messaging, the drop-offs are not as high as we expect. So again, significant in that terms, but just the adoption numbers are not surprising. And satisfaction, this kind of follows with the other chart that I just showed you. So it's kind of about the same. Now, I want to get into what people liked or did not like about messaging. And that first stat is clearly the most important one. And this is indicative of all channels in its infancy. As people start developing a channel, they're not necessarily connected with the rest of the business, rest of the customer service organization within a business. And what we've seen at various customers is that in a lot of cases, the messaging channels normally start out as part of an initiative by the social media wing of the organization, as opposed to the customer service wing, which means there doesn't exist a connection between people who are responding to messages on, say, Facebook Messenger as part of social media and people who are actually doing customer service. So the SLAs don't necessarily apply. The information doesn't always get transferred. So if you get transferred out of the team that's dealing with social media into a regular channel, the chances are you will have to repeat a lot of that information because the contextual transfers have not become as smooth as they are with the other transfers that exist. So having to repeat information, clearly the number one challenge that consumers are facing. The other thing probably to note over here is the third and fourth bar where the responses were prompt or not relevant. We again, that's indicative of a channel that is fairly new. Businesses are trying to understand how to use messaging, what is a good cadence. And Ian talked a little bit about this earlier. It's a channel where you can send a message and walk away, come back and send another message. So the businesses are still trying to figure out what is a cadence that is acceptable to the end customer that you need to respond to. How often do you respond to a customer that sends you one message every 5 minutes? How do you load up your agents in a way that they have enough work and they're not just sitting around idle while they wait for a customer to respond? So I think there's a lot of things that businesses are still trying to figure out. And that's the reason why for those two responses, and we think those numbers will significantly go down over time as the processes around messaging are more solidified. Again, this is a split again between US and UK. The numbers are almost the same between US and UK. I think people find the same pain points across the globe, no matter what. And this is, again, as we talked earlier, this is indicative of a channel that's still being developed in businesses. What I really want to talk about from here is I want to really give you a recipe book of sorts for a successful solution to messaging. And this will go back to all the things that we talked about so far and the pieces that Ian talked about earlier in his presentation as well. So where do we start? That's really the key, right? Where do we start when we try to tackle a channel like messaging? We believe that you need to start at the messaging hub. And Ian talked about this earlier. Don't get caught up in which channel you need to service first. You need to find a framework that is capable of handling any channel as it comes through. So you need you basically need a messaging hub that can connect to any channel of choice. And we actually believe that the messaging hub goes beyond just your traditional channels that people would consider messaging, which is your Apple Business Chats, your Facebook Messenger, or your Twitter Direct messages. It has to encompass other things which fall under the messaging definition that we heard about earlier. Any channel that you can send a message, walk away, and be able to come back and pick up the conversation at the point you left off should be considered a messaging channel. So you will see on my picture that I do have email and secure messaging listed as messaging. That's again a place where we think tools will go towards soon, because if you consider it, email is also a channel where you can send a message, you can get a response, you can walk away, and you can pick up that conversation. Today, it's not set up like a messaging. Today, it's set up more like a threaded conversation, but we think that will change. So all of these come into the messaging hub, and the messaging hub plays a very critical role. It allows you to add channels easily, which is really important. And as we've seen from past experience, that the popular channels will keep changing over time. It will keep changing based on geography. So Facebook's popular in the US. If you go over to China, it's a WeChat. And if you go to India, it's WhatsApp and Viber, etc. Right? So the channels that people prefer will change based on their geographic location, will change based on time as well. So you need a messaging hub that really has the ability to bring channels in quickly. The other piece the messaging hub does is it allows you to connect all these channels into your standard customer service tool set in a consistent way. By consistent, I don't mean we pick the lowest common denominator and just service that. You need to connect the channels in all the richness that it has. So, for example, Apple Business Chat supports Apple Pay. None of the other channels today support a means of payment, but you need the messaging hub to be able to have that richness, but do it consistently. So when another channel comes in that supports payments, you can easily add that in. And that's where I think an API-based connection into the messaging hub is also as important, because that allows you to bring in more channels without necessarily waiting for the product cycle to catch up with the new channel that's come in. The other thing the messaging channel allows you to, should allow you to do is to have a communication that is cross-channel. Just because a customer contacted you via WhatsApp first doesn't mean he's going to continue the conversation on WhatsApp, or that when he contacts you via SMS or Facebook Messenger later on, it's a different conversation. So you need to be able to tie these conversations together. And occasionally you will want to take a conversation to a richer channel. So if somebody sends you an SMS, you might want to see if, oh, they're on an Apple device, so maybe I can move this conversation over to Apple Business Chat. The customer experience remains exactly the same because it's the same tool they'll be using. However, I now have the ability to respond using much richer content. So those are, again, abilities that a good messaging hub can bring in. The next thing is obviously, this speaks to the siloedness of messaging channels that we have today. You need the ability for the messaging hub to connect to a proper customer engagement platform. This brings in all the power that the customer engagement platform can bring in, including the automated AI services, the workflows, the SLAs, the analytics that spans the entire engagement hub together. So this is what ties the entire solution together. This enables a consistent way that a business responds to a customer, regardless of what channel the contact comes in. So this is really key. And one of the things that you will notice when you look at the picture in detail is when you plug in AI, and this is something that we've seen, and most people plug in AI at the very front of the conversation. It does a few things, and in most cases escalates out to an agent, and then there is no AI from that point forward. one of the things that we believe, and that's part of any good AI solution, is the AI is always present. The AI is available at the beginning of the conversation to converse with the customer, through the conversation to guide the agent, and at any point when the agent feels that the conversation has gotten to a point where you can hand off to an automated system, because say you're processing a transaction, you should have the ability to hand off to the automated system. So the AI is kind of present through the entire conversation. That's again another thing that you should look at when you select a customer engagement platform. And obviously that's a picture of the how the eGain platform connects the different pieces together. So we talked a little bit about AI, and AI is really, I think, key with messaging more than the other channels. And I'll tell you why. With most of the other channels, you have a lot of control on how customers decide to connect with you. Say, for example, you have a web chat. You can choose to take customers down a particular journey and expose them to web chat when they're ready with a question. You can choose to provide them with offers up front to determine what's the right point the customer should engage. You can choose to do deflection by providing knowledge articles to the customer to answer simple queries. For example, where is your location? No reason to bring them into the contact center to answer that question. We can provide them with self-service. So you get a lot of chances to intercept the customer on a traditional journey into the contact center. With messaging, that's not always the case. If you enable Facebook Messenger, for example, there's going to be that message button on your Facebook page. Somebody can go click it and start conversing with you. The same goes with SMS. You enable SMS on a phone number, somebody can just send you an SMS. The same with all the other messaging channels. So you could get a lot of contacts into your contact center that probably don't always need an agent to respond. So having an AI that can converse with the customer at the front end of the conversation is really key in a messaging solution. So again, you need the AI to be able to engage the customers. You also need an AI that's a little more than just triaging. What we've seen is a lot of the AI engines that you put in front of messaging kind of triages, get some information from the customer, hands off. Traditionally, what the IVR used to do, where it asks you for your account number and a few other pieces of information before it passes off to the agent. You really do need an AI that has the ability to process some of these requests and guide the customers to resolutions so that the traffic doesn't hit your contact center. Having a good AI in front of messaging actually improves the experience for the customer, because it reduces their wait time, because you're not waiting to get into the contact center for your first response. You have the ability to take care of a lot of those things by self-service using the AI. So it actually, a good AI in front of a messaging system will improve customer experience. That's one of the things that we normally hear from customers is, if you put an AI in front, how will it impact customer experience? And we really feel that if you put a good AI in front of the messaging, it will improve, not reduce customer sat. The next thing that you need once you have an AI picking up that first piece of information is you need a desktop that's capable of handling a digital interaction. And the reason I say you need a desktop that's capable of handling a digital interaction is, with traditional desktops, the features that you really need to carry out a conversation or messaging may not be present. And one of the big things that we see absent from most desktops today is a conversational view. Most desktops are wired for cases. So cases are short-lived, and in messaging, there is no such thing as short-lived. Everything is a long conversation, and it can go over very large periods of time. Somebody might send you a message, you would respond to them, and they may not respond to you for a couple of days. So it's a long-lived conversation. You need to have a desktop that's capable of showing you what that entire conversation looks like. So just like the user is able to just scroll up his smartphone to see previous messages, your agent should also be able to do the same thing. They should be able to scroll up and see what has this customer told me in the past, so that the conversation stays relevant. You also need a desktop that's capable of handling all channels without putting the load of understanding the channel on the agent. So you need to shield the agent from having to learn all the intricacies of the other channels. That is not saying that you shouldn't let the agent know which channel the customer is coming from. You should definitely do that. However, the agent shouldn't have to decide or shouldn't have to make a decision on what capability you can use on a particular channel. So they shouldn't have to look at it and say, oh, this person is Apple Business Chat, I can use Apple Pay. That should be something that the tool should guide the agent towards. The tool should be able to morph itself to present tools to the agent that are applicable for that messaging channel. So all of that complexity, we believe, should be hidden away from the agent, and the agent gets a consistent experience. That improves your AX, which in turn will improve your customer experience as well. And the last piece, we talked about this earlier, is the AI needs to be ever present. The AI starts from having that initial conversation with the customer, and then as the conversation moves to an agent, the AI is present, guiding the agent to a solution. And finally, if at a point the agent believes it can be handed back to an automated system, you have the ability to hand that back to an AI system. So definitely a digital first desktop is required for messaging. Again, that's a screenshot of the eGain desktop, and you can see the scrollable conversation view over there. So that's a good start into a messaging solution, but there are still things that we are working on. There are still things that we continue to improve upon. These are things that we have some very interesting ideas on. We expect to see some really cool things come out in the product soon. But I did want to leave you with a few points to consider. Right? When you get into messaging, what does the workforce planning look like? How do you determine that an agent has been loaded enough that he has got enough work to do, and not so much that he's overloaded? Because with messaging, the cadence of the conversation is not in your control. There's no set cadence. With web chat, it's one-on-one, it's synchronous. But with asynchronous messaging, there's no set cadence. So you need to determine what the agent load looks like. And as Ian had mentioned earlier, knowing the types of activities that come in and what the cadence on certain types of activities or certain types of conversations looks like will give you an idea of how to plan that. And again, we're working on some pieces as well. Be happy to have deeper conversations if anybody's interested. The other part is how do you balance your agent experience versus your CX? There's a lot of capability that's available in all these messaging channels, but how do you give the agent a good experience while keeping the customer experience? How do you make sure the agent stays engaged? We always talk about how do we make sure that the customer stays engaged with the conversation that spans over long periods of time. They don't get frustrated. They believe they are getting responses promptly, etc. The same applies to the agent. How do you ensure that the agent is engaged through the entire conversation? What can you do within the tools that you have to ensure that the correct context is always present to the agent, and the agent can jump into the middle of a conversation at any point of time? Do you always send the conversation to the agent that answered it previously? What happens if that agent is currently occupied or currently on vacation, etc.? So these are all things to consider while you plan a messaging solution. And the last thing is impact on contact center metrics. Today, contact center metrics are driven by things like average handle time. How do you calculate average handle time when the conversation is long-lived and it could take days to complete a conversation? What is average handle time? How much time has the agent spent on that conversation? So again, these are some things to consider, and do feel free to contact us, and we have some ideas around these as well. The last piece that I wanted to leave you guys with is a customer story. This is one of the large cable companies in the US. They needed a digital-first solution. They were looking to provide high-quality customer experience through their current channel and emerging channels. They picked eGain because we offered them with a comprehensive set of solutions, so they could have one vendor that could handle all the networks, all that they needed, all the channels that they wanted to process, etc. They were also very concerned about security, and we had the ability to match their security needs. Currently, we're servicing about 12 million customers for them via messaging, as well as web chat. And the way we have set up is we have the ability to have agents who can handle both messaging and web chat and switch between them. So it's actually a really nice solution that's set up, and it's currently servicing about 12 million or so customers. The other key thing with that solution is it's 24/7, meaning we actually take no downtime on that solution at all, even for maintenance. There's no maintenance windows, there's no maintenance downtime. So actually a really interesting engagement that we've had. I just wanted to leave you guys with the real customer story at the end. If you need more information about this or about anything that I've talked about earlier, feel free to contact us. That's probably the end of my slides. Thank you all. I think we'll take questions now, right? Diane, handing it off back to you.
Actually, thanks, Arvind, and also thanks, Ian. Unfortunately, we're out of time for the Q&A. So the remaining questions will be answered through email. Thank you all for participating in today's webinar. Thank you.